In the first half of March 1943, it looks like total war in Germany means that both the United Nations alliance and the German Nazi regime have declared unrestricted war on the German people. Most Germans will be able to do nothing about that except cower and hope to survive another day. But a small group of Wehrmacht officers have had enough and can do something. For them, it is high time to assassinate German Führer Adolf Hitler or die trying. This is War Against Humanity, a series of World War II in real time. I'm Spartacus, Olsson. In the second half of February, Reichspropaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels' total war speech described the tone of the war on all fronts. In Germany itself, the resistance suffered deaths as 4 top resistance operatives were executed. United Nations bombing on Germany was now round the clock, and in French Saint-Nazaire, the UN allies deliberately targeted civilians to disrupt the German U-boat war. In Berlin, 200 women began a protest on the Rosenstraße, trying to stop the deportation of their Jewish husbands. The famine in Henan continued and continues. Despite that, the leader of the Chinese nationalists, Chiang Kai-shek, turns down U.S. offers to help feed the region now in early March. He fears that U.S. aid will interfere with their assistance on the upcoming renewed offensives against the Japanese. The story is similar in Bengal, India. Throughout 1942, food here became continuously scarcer as the war slowed down imports, environmental disasters struck, and the British colonial masters prioritized feeding the war ahead of the nourishment of their Bengali subjects. Rice, not just the basis but the main part of the regional diet, is growing harder and harder to get in sufficient amounts, and prices have been skyrocketing for months. In December, the Bengal government stepped in with harsh regulations to stem the inflation. Now, 3 months later, it has done little to help, and on March 11, they give up and allow the price of rice to rise uncontrolled, leaving even more people unable to afford basic food, if they can get it at all, that is. Thousands of kilometers further west, the German Nazi government not only resigns from keeping their people safe, but will now deliberately put them further into harm's way. We've asked ourselves how the Nazis expect to make this war more total than it already was, and now we start to understand what Goebbels was preparing the Germans for. More sacrifices on the civilian front as well. It begins with increased rations and restrictions. On March 10, the manufacture of suits, costumes, bath salts, and firecrackers is prohibited. Amateur photography and the private use of telephones is now heavily restricted as well. Trivial things for now, perhaps, but harsher measures are to follow. Not only from the inside, but also from abroad. Here's the thing. When Goebbels held his total war speech a few weeks ago, the Nazi leadership were firmly decided that they would never accept the United Nations' demand for unconditional capitulation. In fact, this decision was taken by German Führer Adolf Hitler already 2 decades ago, even before he was the Führer. In his manifesto, Mein Kampf, he concludes that foreign policy must be based on might and assertion of power for the national race. It's based on his idea of how life is organized as a racial struggle. They who want to live will therefore fight, and they who are not willing to fight in this world of eternal struggle do not deserve life. On November 27, 1941, when the offensive on Moscow had just ground to a halt, he goes on the record explaining to the Danish and Croatian foreign ministers what that means in respect to this war. On this matter, too, I am ice cold. If the German people shall at some point no longer be strong and willing enough to sacrifice its blood for its own existence, then it should go under and be exterminated by another more mighty power. I will then not shed any tears of loss for the German people. Sentiments that we saw Goebbels repeat a few weeks ago in his diary while preparing for his speech. So that is what total war means. Fight to the last drop of blood. No compromise, only victory or death. The Nazi leaders know full well what that means in practice, and if their people haven't already understood as much from the events or through Goebbels' words, they are about to find out the hard way. Both US daytime bombing of strategic targets and British nighttime bombing of civilian targets now increases. The distinctions between the two is mostly semantics. With the technical impossibility of dropping bombs with any precision at all, and the simple fact that strategic and civilian targets are pretty much in the same places, it comes down to more of the same. The goal is to bomb some part of Germany every day, every night, every hour, at ever-increasing scope and pace until the Nazis surrender, which we already know that they will not. Since we saw the huge 1,000 bomber raids in May and June 1942, the RAF Bomber Command under Acting Air Marshal Arthur Harris has been flying on and off bombing German ports and cities, with varied success. But now the RAF has modernized its fleet with new Halifax and Lancaster bombers equipped with new navigational tools such as the blind bombing device Oboe. On March 5, they launch a new offensive, this time on the Ruhr, the heart of German heavy industry. The first target is Essen, home to the huge Krupp factory complexes. Late on the 5th, 442 aircraft depart for the heavily fortified area. 56 have to return because of damage or technical breakdowns, and 15 are shot down. But 362 make it through to drop their loads on the target area. In 40 minutes and spread over 3 waves, explosives and incendiary bombs are dropped on the historic city of Essen and its industrial surroundings. Allied reconnaissance show that 53 Krupp buildings have been hit. The Germans report that 3,018 houses have been destroyed, with a further 2,166 being seriously damaged. Between 457 and 482 Germans die, the deadliest air raid on a German city to date. On the 12th, Essen is hit again. Another 198 people die. Cities outside of the Ruhr also continue to be bombed. 300 people are killed in Nuremberg on the 8th, 208 in Munich on the 9th, and 112 in Stuttgart on the 11th. Tens of thousands more lose their homes, family members, and loved ones. But for many on the other side of the German barrel, the war can't even possibly engulf their life more totally than it already does. Soviet partisan operations is on the rise in Ukraine, and the German occupiers commit themselves to increased violent reprisals. Like in Kuryukivka in the Chernihiv region, where the partisans attacked to liberate hostages back in February. Unable to go after the actual perpetrators, in the first 2 days of March, German SS heads to the village to retaliate against the civilian population. They begin to drive people out of their homes into the town center, but when people start to escape, the SS men resort to just shooting people in their homes. Those already assembled are machine gunned, and the roughly 13 houses in the village are set ablaze. On the 9th, the SS returns to finish off anyone who escaped and returned by burning them alive. Around 6,700 civilians are murdered. And this story repeats itself across the occupied Axis lands over and over again. The deportation of European Jews to the murder facilities in Eastern Europe also continues, as does the Rosenstrasse standoff. On March 1st, the women have to interrupt their protest as the British bomb Berlin, but they return on the 2nd. News of the protest is still leaking to the rest of the world, and the Nazis are a bit lost for a solution. First of all, there is no unity on what should actually happen to the men. The Gestapo had not rounded them up with a firm intent to deport, but to check their special status was indeed still grounds to not deport them. On the other hand, Adolf Eichmann at the Reichssicherheitshauptamt, RSHA, under SS Reichsführer Heinrich Himmler, wants them deported no matter what, and insists that the women must be dealt with harshly. Goebbels is furious at the RSHA for creating a PR disaster, writing to Himmler, "One has to intervene all over the place to ward off damages. The efforts of certain officers are so lacking in political savvy that one cannot let them operate on their own for 10 minutes. Finally, on March 6, Goebbels intercedes personally and orders the 1,800 men released. He turns it into a PR coup by letting it sound like they will now refrain from deporting German Jews in general, a statement that will even be reported by United Nations intelligence as a success to the UN leaders. But it's a lie. In the first half of March 1943, 6 transports from Berlin arrive at Auschwitz-Birkenau. They all follow the same pattern as Osttransport 32 that arrives on March 2nd with 1,736 Jews. Of them, 292 men and 385 women are selected for forced labor. The remaining 1,059, including all the children and elderly, are murdered immediately in the gas chambers. And like the reprisals, this story too repeats itself across the Axis lands. On March 11, 7,341 Jews from Bulgarian-occupied Macedonia and Thrace, practically all Jews in the region, are rounded up by the SS with help of Bulgarian soldiers. They are housed in a provisional transit camp in Skopje before they are sent to their deaths at Treblinka. 4,000 Jews from Thrace follow, and roughly 1,200 more will eventually be sent to Auschwitz. Only about 200 Macedonian and 250 Thracian Jews will survive the war. In occupied Poland, between 15,000 and 20,000 Jews have been interned at the Krakow ghetto since March 1941. In the last 2 years, several factories and forced labor camps were established in and around the ghetto. Among them, the Deutsche Emaillenwarenfabrik, owned by German businessman Oskar Schindler. Multiple waves of deportations to the Belzec extermination facility occurred in 1942, but the ghetto is now to be completely liquidated. On March 13 and 14, about 2,000 Jews are shot and 3,000 more are deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau, where 2,450 of them are gassed on arrival. A small number of forced laborers deemed essential for the Krakow industry are left in the Pazov forced labor camp. Now, Schindler is a card-carrying member of the Nazi Party, and until now, his only interest in the Jew has been free labor. But the brutality of his fellow Nazis has triggered a change of heart. When the liquidation begins, he keeps his Jewish workers sheltered inside his factory. When it is over, he manages to get them labeled as essential workers. From now on, he'll try to use his power as a businessman to hire and save as many Jews as he can. These mass murders, these genocides, are being orchestrated by German Nazis, but there is no lack of willing helpers within sympathetic groups of other nationalities. Beyond the formerly Allied Axis powers, we've already seen how locals helped to start the Holocaust in Lithuania, Poland, and Western Soviet Union. How in occupied Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France, collaboration is widespread. How in Croatia, ethnic nationalists have joined the terror wholesale, targeting both Serbs and Jews, and that the predominantly Serb Chetniks are collaborating with the Nazis to wage an ethnic war on Muslims and Croats. Now, more organizations are forming to formally join the Nazis based on shared ethnic and ideological animosity. Belarusian nationalists already assisted the German Einsatzgruppen in the fall of 1941 as they killed hundreds of thousands in the Holocaust of bullets. Many believers in the myth that Judaism was somehow connected to Soviet suppression and oppression. On March 1, the Belarusian Central Council is officially formed, cementing the bond between Belarusian nationalists and the Nazi occupiers. In neighboring Ukraine, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army, UPA, was founded in October 1941, and like the Belarusian Central Council, wants a Nazi-affiliated national Ukrainian state. Carved out of regions previously held by Russia and Poland, and it should be ethnically homogeneous. The violence is oriented towards anyone in the way of this, sometimes even the Germans. Starting in late February, though, the UPA starts to resolve the Polish question with a gruesome ethnic cleansing campaign against Poles in Volhynia and eastern Galicia. The UPA militias, filled with experienced German-trained genocidal murderers, go from village to village, burning, pillaging, and murdering any Pole that they can find. Ukrainian villagers are enticed to murder their neighbors, and some do, while others refuse or even attempt to hide and protect their Polish community members, at peril of losing their own lives. But like a wave growing bigger and bigger under the surface, only to show its true size once it's about to impact the shore, resistance is growing everywhere. In Germany, the suicide murder pact that Hitler and his cronies are clearly pursuing is awakening a renewed sense of urgency among his opposition in the Wehrmacht. A group of Wehrmacht and Abwehr officers have been dissatisfied with Hitler for quite some time now. The Abwehr's deputy chief Hans Oster gathered broad support for a coup in 1940 and 41, but that failed with the success of the Western offensive and Hitler's reward for that in form of bribery through exorbitant pay raises and bonuses to many of the Wehrmacht high officers. After the Eastern Front was opened in June 41, the conspirators, largely centered around Wilhelm Canaris, Oster's boss at the head of the Abwehr, hoped to find enough momentum for a separate peace with the Western Allies. Perhaps even to get Hitler, or at least some of the other Nazi leaders, behind such a plot. Any more drastic actions has been held back, in large part by Canaris. But now that the UN allies have formally declared that unconditional surrender or total destruction are the only alternatives, and the Nazi leadership is united for the latter, Canaris and his likes take the foot off the brakes. The elimination of Hitler is now their only option. Plans have been drawn up to replace the Nazi government in Berlin, to seize government buildings and to form an insurrectionist army, which will be led by General Friedrich Olbricht and headed by retired Chief of the General Staff Ludwig Beck. They have three plans and try to execute one of them on March 13. As Indy has shown in his episode from that week, the plan fails. For now, to the dismay of the conspiring officers, the Führer lives. But it's a tiny minority in the Wehrmacht who oppose Hitler. The vast majority of his officers remain his pliable tool for both conventional war of suppression and terror. And if they aren't able to help, there are plenty of allied or collaborationist forces who will try. In Greece this month, they will, however, fail. The German mobilization of forced laborers is about to be implemented at large scale here. The far-left resistance, EAM, calls for a general strike to protest the measures on February 28. On March 5th, they call for an open protest. They only get a disappointing 7,000 into the streets of Athens, and the police open fire on them, killing 5, wounding 50, and scattering the protest. But a group of protesters have managed to break into City Hall and try to burn the voter registration archives, which is used as the basis for mobilization. While the protests themselves fail, it is taken as a sign by the people to rise up and join the strike, and they do en masse. All students, 65% of all civil servants, all the newspapers, and countless regular workers lay down their work the next day. For the first time since occupation in Europe began, the collaborationist government and Italian occupiers have to back down, and the Germans accept that they will not get any more laborers from Greece. But the Athenians do not believe that this is a permanent state, and the protests will continue. In the countryside, especially the mountains of the Italian occupation zone, the resistance, heavily supported by the British Special Operations Executive, is becoming more and more brazen and now control large sections of land. On March 4th, the military wing of EAM, Elas, ambushed an Italian convoy at Faridicambos near the town of Siatista. The Italian garrison at Grevena are called in. 700 Italians now face around 250 resistance fighters. But as battle begins, right-wing resistance members nearby and masses of villagers flock to the Elas forces' rescue. During the 3-day battle, the resistance grows to 2,000, who finally defeat the Italians, taking over 550 prisoners and causing 95 fatalities. To not mention capturing loads of equipment, including light artillery. The Italians carry out retaliatory actions, burning the village Servia to the ground on the 6th and carry out mass execution in Sarizzani on the 12th. But the resistance has swelled with many new permanent militants, and the garrison at Grevena is cut off from the rest of the Italian-controlled areas. The situation just a bit to the north in occupied Yugoslavia is similar, but different. Here, Josip Broz Tito's partisans have surprised the supposed Axis alliance by launching an attack north at Prozor instead of retreating south or east as they expected. The Axis are regrouping to fight them in the north, as he seems to want. In Prozor, Tito has set up the central hospital to hold 4,000 wounded whom he has vowed to not leave behind to be murdered by the Axis. While his brigades fight northwards, he surprises everyone again when on the 2nd and 3rd his engineers blow up all the bridges across the Neretva. The Axis assumes he wants to keep the Chetnik forces on the other side of the river and out of the battle. But the entire leadership and most partisan fighters are now truly trapped inside the labyrinthian mountain geography of Bosnia-Herzegovina, facing impossible odds. On the opposite bank, parts of the Chetnik forces move north towards Jablanica to join the battle from there. In reality, Tito is playing for time. The central hospital is being evacuated, and his engineers are secretly constructing a temporary bridge across the river. As the feigned attack continues northward, the majority of the partisans start to slip away along the western riverbank. On the 6th, the bridge is complete. By now, the Axis have understood that they have been had. The first forces cross under intense bombardment from the Luftwaffe. The bridge is in a canyon with walls too steep and narrow for them to get a hit on the bridge. The Germans and Italians are now on the wrong side of Prozor. On the other side, some Chetnik forces have scrambled a defense, but they are quickly defeated by the 1st Brigades to cross. In the next hours, more than 10,000 men and women and 4,000 wounded are transported over the temporary bridge. In the early hours of the 7th, they blow the temporary bridge and slip away eastwards into the mountains. And they will live to fight another day. For the Chetniks, it is a blow to morale, which will eventually lead to their forces refusing to fight for the Axis, a prospect that was, anyway, never in the cards, what with the Germans planning to disarm and disband them when this was over. The Axis forces may still be victorious, or at least prevail in many places, but their prospects look grimmer and grimmer. German officers looking to assassinate Hitler, and almost succeeding at that. Partisans putting up such a fight that even when they do not win, they give the Axis such a bloody nose that they retreat for now. Ordinary people joining the resistance fight by the thousands. Peaceful protests forcing the Nazis to back down. Until now, in more than 3 years of war, we haven't seen any of that. Is the armor finally cracking? Never forget.